I used to think love was a quiet, steady thing. Less fire, more foundation. You get to a certain age and start believing that peace is all you really want. I was 57, divorced once before, and finally living what I thought was a calm life with my second wife, Lorraine. We'd been married for almost 10 years. She had a daughter, Kayla, from a previous relationship, and though I never officially adopted her, I took on the role of father without hesitation. I paid for her private high school, gave her a car when she turned 18, and put her through college like she was my own flesh and blood. Lorraine always said I was too generous, but she smiled when I paid the bills, nodded approvingly when I handled emergencies, and never stopped me from giving. I thought that meant we were in sync, two people rebuilding something sturdy from the ruins of past failures. I wasn't a perfect man, but I was a good one. Or so I told myself. The day everything changed started like any other. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of dull, cloudy day that makes you want to nap or read a book with a cup of coffee in hand. Lorraine was out grocery shopping, and I was heading upstairs to get my laptop charger from the hallway closet. Kayla had friends over in her room, laughing the way college girls do when they think no one's listening. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I paused by her door because I heard my name, my full name, not stepdad or that guy. It was my actual name, spoken with that sharp, scornful edge I'd heard before but never fully acknowledged. And then, as if the universe wanted to slap the naivety right out of me, I heard her say it. I doubt this joke of a man will survive the next 1 year after I implement my plans. Mom already told me I'm getting 80% of his properties once he dies. The room exploded with giggles. I froze. My hand clenched around the charger so tight it left an imprint in my palm. My mouth went dry. 80%? Plans? My death? I wasn't even sick. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Maybe she was joking. Maybe it was some twisted attempt at humor. But something in her voice, so smug, so entitled, told me she wasn't kidding. That wasn't the sound of someone making a joke. It was the sound of someone plotting. Someone sure they were already in control. My heart started to race, not from fear, but from a different kind of pain, betrayal. That word gets thrown around a lot, but until you hear a child you helped raise talk about your death like a business strategy, you don't really understand it. I wasn't just hurt. I felt humiliated. Played. Like I'd been walking around my own home in a costume labeled provider, while behind my back, they were laughing and plotting their inheritance. I felt something harden in me that afternoon, like a wall slamming down. I didn't knock. I didn't yell. I opened the door calmly, stepped inside, and said, "Why wait till a year? Do it now and waste no time." The silence that followed was thick and acidic. Kayla's friends looked horrified. She stared at me, face drained of color, lips parted as if caught between words. No one laughed anymore. I smiled, not out of joy, but the kind of cold smile that comes when you realize the game's been rigged and now it's your turn to flip the table. I didn't say another word, just walked out, each step heavier than the last. Down the hall, down the stairs, into the kitchen, where I poured myself a drink with shaking hands. That night, I sat alone in my study for hours, the glass of scotch untouched, the silence pressing in on me like a second skin. My thoughts weren't racing. They were methodical, clear, focused. This wasn't going to be an emotional reaction. It was going to be a calculated response, a correction. I had always believed that family should be earned, not just inherited by marriage. I gave Kayla more chances than I should have. Brushed off her attitude, her snide comments about my age, the way she rolled her eyes whenever I asked her to be responsible. I told myself she was just young, just figuring life out. But she wasn't a child anymore. She was 21, old enough to know right from wrong, old enough to know that wishing someone dead for financial gain makes you a monster, not a misunderstood daughter. And Lorraine? If what Kayla said was true, then the woman I loved, had chosen to spend the rest of my life with, was in on it. She wasn't just turning a blind eye. She was actively feeding her daughter delusions of inheritance. That cut deeper than anything. The woman I'd trusted most, sharing pillow talk about my assets and my death like it was a lottery ticket. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there in the dark, thinking about every moment I ignored my gut. Every time I chose peace over confrontation. Every time I told myself that love meant patience, and family meant forgiveness. I'd been played, but I wasn't going to be played again. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for the axe to fall. The next morning, I would start making moves, not in anger, but in clarity. Because once someone reveals who they are, you don't give them another chance to wear a mask. You take the mask off and show them the door. And that's exactly what I planned to do. The morning after I heard my stepdaughter plot my death, the sky was crystal clear, almost offensively so. One of those mornings where the world looks too beautiful for the chaos that's brewing beneath its surface. I didn't wake up groggy. In fact, I hadn't slept a minute. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching Lorraine breathe steadily, her back turned to me like always. It struck me that I had spent years lying next to someone who had probably been whispering about me behind my back the whole time. What did their late-night conversations sound like? Did they joke about how stupid I was to keep them housed and comfortable? Was I the bedtime story, the rich old fool who paid for everything? I didn't touch her, didn't say a word. I simply got up, made myself a black coffee, and dialed 2 numbers, my attorney's and a locksmith's. My voice was calm, detached, surgical. I need immediate services, I told them both. Today, the locksmith showed up before Lorraine even got out of bed. I told him to change every lock on the house, front door, back door, garage, even the basement. He raised an eyebrow, probably wondering why the hell I was making my home Fort Knox, but he didn't ask. I watched him work while sipping my coffee, then paid him in cash. Lorraine finally came downstairs around 10 a.m., robe barely tied, fake smiling like she always did when she needed something. "Why are there new locks?" she asked, squinting at me like she couldn't decide if this was a prank or a surprise. I didn't answer her question. I pointed to the kitchen table, where 2 envelopes sat, one for her, one for Kayla. Lorraine laughed nervously, then looked at the papers. Her expression shifted. "What the hell is this?" she snapped, suddenly wide awake. I leaned against the counter, letting the silence hang thick between us. "It's what happens when you treat someone like a joke for 10 years, I said quietly. "It's your exit." Lorraine opened the envelope and read the typed letter I had my lawyer draw up. Termination of all financial support, immediate eviction under property law, and revocation of her inclusion in my estate. She went pale. "You can't just throw us out," she hissed, the tone in her voice shifting from disbelief to panic. I didn't flinch. "I absolutely can," I replied, my voice firmer now. "And I will." She moved toward me, trying to summon that fake warmth she'd always used to get me to back down. "Babe, let's talk. Please." "Whatever this is," I cut her off. "You know what this is. Your daughter said I'd be dead within a year, that she was getting 80% of my properties. That you told her so." I heard it with my own ears. Lorraine froze. It was like watching someone's mask crack down the middle. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's what I thought." She started crying, crocodile tears flowing like a broken faucet. I didn't buy for a second. Kayla came downstairs a few minutes later, dressed like she had a photo shoot scheduled, completely unaware that the ground was about to collapse beneath her feet. "What's going on?" she asked, annoyed by the tension in the room. Lorraine turned to her daughter, sobbing, and said, "He knows. He heard you." Kayla blinked, confused for a moment, then looked at me. And that's when I saw it, the tiniest flicker of fear. She knew exactly what I was talking about. "You're kicking us out?" she asked, arms crossed, defiant to the end. "I'm removing a cancer," I said flatly. "You talked about my death like it was a vacation you were planning. You made it clear I'm not family, so don't expect to be treated like it." They argued, of course. Lorraine begged. Kayla threatened to go public, to drag my name through the mud, to expose me on social media. I laughed. "Go ahead. Tell them you were thrown out for plotting a man's death for his money. See how far that sympathy train gets you." They didn't have anything on me. No proof, no leverage, nothing but entitlement and assumptions. I had all the paperwork ready. My lawyer had been thorough. I had video footage from the hallway camera, barely audible, but enough to support my claims. And even if I didn't, I had something better, my backbone. The thing I'd been missing for years. The thing they had mistaken for weakness. By noon, their bags were on the front porch, black trash bags, not suitcases. I made sure of that. It wasn't just about removing them. It was about making a statement. Kayla screamed at me as she dragged her overpriced purses out the door. Lorraine begged for just one more month. I stood there, arms crossed, watching it all unfold like a play I'd seen too many times. The neighbors peeked from behind curtains. I didn't care. Let them gossip. Let them watch. I wanted the world to see what it looks like when a man finally stops being a fool. After they were gone, the silence was deafening. No footsteps upstairs. No forced small talk over dinner. No passive-aggressive comments about how I should really update my wardrobe or invest in a facelift. Just me and the sound of my own breath. It should have felt lonely. It didn't. It felt like liberation. That night, I opened a bottle of scotch I'd been saving for retirement. I poured myself a glass, sat on the patio, and watched the sunset without anyone asking me what I was thinking. I thought about everything I'd given them. Time, money, a roof, a future. I thought about how easily they'd try to throw it all away, like I was just a temporary obstacle on the path to their inheritance. But most of all, I thought about how satisfying it felt to say no, to finally choose myself. The morning after I evicted Lorraine and Kayla, the house felt like a stranger I was finally meeting for the first time. Without their presence, no loud footsteps, no sarcastic sighs, no perfume trailing down the hallway. It was eerily quiet, and that silence felt like a revelation. I walked through each room like I was reclaiming them. The living room, where Lorraine used to sprawl across the couch like a queen overseeing her domain, now looked like a space I could finally breathe in. The kitchen, once cluttered with Kayla's half-finished smoothies and her mother's expensive supplements, was clean and still. For a brief moment, I stood at the window over the sink and realized how foreign peace had become. I had spent years thinking compromise was love, thinking silence was stability. But now that they were gone, it wasn't just quiet. It was sacred. Later that afternoon, I sat across from my attorney, Robert, an old friend who had helped me through my first divorce years ago. He was one of the few people I trusted implicitly. The moment I stepped into his office, he gave me that look, the one that says, "What the hell happened now?" I told him everything, every word I'd heard through Kayla's door, every bit of fake affection that now made sense in hindsight. Robert listened without interrupting, nodding slowly like he was adding up years of suspicions that finally made sense. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair, exhaled through his nose, and said, "So what do you want to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? Not what I felt, not what I'd lost, but what I wanted to do about it. "I want them out of everything," I said firmly. "The will, the insurance, the real estate trusts. Every document that had their names on it. I want them gone." Robert didn't flinch. He'd seen this kind of clarity before. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and started jotting down names, assets, titles. I watched him work, each scratch of the pen feeling like a weight being lifted from my chest. We went through every clause in my will. I had originally designated 80% of my estate to be split between Lorraine and Kayla, with the remaining 20% going to a few charities and distant relatives. I don't know what possessed me to be so generous. Maybe guilt for not having biological children. Maybe hope that my second family would give me the legacy I craved. But generosity without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-destruction in slow motion. As Robert read the original will aloud, I sat there feeling like a ghost at my own funeral. To my loving wife Lorraine, I leave the primary residence and half of my retirement fund. I felt sick. Loving wife? She'd stood in that kitchen, sobbing over her eviction, and never once denied what I'd heard. Never denied that she had told her daughter I was worth more dead than alive. And yet here she was, immortalized in legal documents as someone who deserved comfort after my death. "Cut her out," I said. "All of it." Robert paused. "You're sure?" I met his eyes and nodded. "Dead sure." We restructured everything. I rewrote the beneficiaries on all my accounts. I placed my properties into a trust that would pass directly to a foundation I'd been quietly supporting for years, one that gave scholarships to students aging out of the foster care system. Kids who didn't have parents handing them the world on a silver platter. Kids who, unlike Kayla, would know what to do with a second chance. I even added a clause to the new will explicitly stating that neither Lorraine nor Kayla would be entitled to challenge any of the terms. If they tried, they'd lose access to everything. even personal items I once intended for sentimental value. I was done leaving breadcrumbs for people who would only use them to circle back and leech more from me. As the paperwork was finalized, Robert leaned back and said, "I've never seen you like this." I smiled grimly. Because I've never been like this. I've always tried to keep the peace, even when it tore me up inside. I kept thinking that if I gave enough, they'd eventually respect me. That love could be earned through loyalty. Robert nodded. That's the oldest lie we tell ourselves. He was right. For years, I had confused obligation with love. I thought that paying bills, funding education, being present, even when I wasn't wanted, that all of that would matter in the end. But what I heard through that door told me otherwise. To them, I was a placeholder, a stepping stone, a joke of a man. By the time I left the law office, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows on the pavement. I walked to my car slowly, letting the weight of the day settle into my bones. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the white-hot, impulsive way I had been when I first overheard their conversation. Now it was something colder, more permanent, like steel hardening after fire. This was what resolve felt like. Not rage, not revenge, just a simple, unmovable decision. They would never benefit from my death. Not a dime, not a square inch of land, not a single keepsake. And if that made me cold-hearted in their eyes, so be it. I'd rather be cold than naive. That night, I lit a cigar on the back patio, a habit I'd abandoned because Lorraine hated the smell. Funny how many parts of myself I had silenced just to make them comfortable. I sat back, watching the stars emerge one by one, and thought about legacy. Not the kind you leave in bank accounts, but the kind you leave in the choices you make when no one's watching. I had made a choice to protect myself, to draw a line, to finally put an end to the masquerade. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man waiting to be replaced. I felt like a man who had reclaimed his name. They say when you cut someone off, you find out what they were really connected to, your heart or your wallet. In Lorraine and Kayla's case, the answer was clear within weeks. At first, they disappeared from my radar completely, which honestly surprised me. No phone calls, no texts, not even a passive-aggressive email. I thought maybe they were too ashamed to reach out. Maybe they realized they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But the silence didn't last. Like most parasites, they only stayed quiet until they found out the food supply was really gone. That's when the desperation started to show. I got the first whisper of their decline from one of Lorraine's old friends, Melissa, who ran into me at the grocery store one afternoon. She hesitated at first, unsure if she should bring it up, but the curiosity on her face gave her away. "I heard about what happened," she said softly, like we were talking about a funeral. "She's staying with her sister." Kayla dropped out of school. I raised an eyebrow. "Dropped out?" Melissa nodded, glancing around to make sure no one was eavesdropping. "Apparently she got arrested. Caught stealing with a friend, some boutique or something downtown. Her mugshot's probably floating around by now." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The universe was doing what it always does, stripping away the illusions people build around themselves when the truth finally comes for them. I went home that night and looked it up. Sure enough, there it was. Kayla, wide-eyed and disheveled, staring into the camera like someone who'd never thought consequences would come for her. She looked nothing like the arrogant girl who once bragged about how she'd inherit 80% of my assets. She looked scared, cornered, human, and yet I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just distance. It was like reading about a stranger. I closed the browser and poured myself a drink, letting the ice clink against the glass as I stared out the window. For so long, I'd carried guilt like a second skin, wondering if I had done enough, given enough, loved enough. But staring at that mugshot, I finally realized, some people aren't broken because they were unloved. Some people are just ungrateful. Lorraine didn't reach out directly, not at first. She went the coward's route, voicemails from unknown numbers, messages left through mutual acquaintances, cryptic posts on social media designed to bait a response. One day, a friend sent me a screenshot of something she posted. "Some men have everything but a heart. Karma finds its way though. Always does." I laughed out loud when I read it. Karma? She really thought being held accountable was karma. She really believed that the consequences of betrayal were somehow unfair. It was astonishing how people who manipulate others always paint themselves as victims the moment the curtain drops. I didn't respond, of course. Silence became my favorite form of communication. It said more than any retort ever could. Then came the letter. Handwritten. Delivered to my office by some courier service. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The handwriting was familiar, elegant, loopy, the kind she always used when writing holiday cards. Inside, it was 3 pages of apologies, half-truths, and veiled requests. She claimed she didn't know Kayla had said those things, insisted she'd never encourage her to wait for my death, and begged me to consider that maybe I misunderstood. She said she was struggling, couch surfing, trying to find work. That she missed me, missed us, that we were a good team, that she never wanted it to end like this. But nowhere in that letter did she admit fault. Not really. No acceptance of how deeply she'd betrayed my trust. Just a lot of carefully arranged words designed to trigger nostalgia and sympathy. The kind of letter written by someone who didn't regret the betrayal, only the consequences. I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer without replying. Not because I was undecided, but because it reminded me why I had made the choices I did. Sometimes people confuse closure with conversation, but I had all the closure I needed. They had shown me who they were. Now I was showing them who I had become. A man who no longer gave second chances to people who gambled with his life. Days turned into weeks, and still the voicemails came. I just want to talk. I'm so sorry. Please, can we meet? I never answered. I didn't even listen to most of them. My assistant flagged them and deleted them after confirming the numbers. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was trying to protect what little peace I had left. Because after years of emotional erosion, peace was finally something I had to guard like a priceless artifact. The truth is, I didn't want revenge. Not really. What I wanted was distance, emotional, legal, physical. I wanted them gone from every corner of my life. And now that they were, the air felt different. I started reading again, taking long walks, calling old friends I hadn't spoken to in years because Lorraine always found a reason to interrupt. I had dinner with my cousin Daniel, one of the few family members who knew the full story. He raised his glass during the meal and said, "To freedom, and to not being the joke anymore." We laughed, genuinely. It was the kind of laughter I hadn't heard from myself in years. Not the kind that covers discomfort, but the kind that bubbles up from a soul that's finally unburdened. But even as I found peace, I couldn't help but reflect on how close I came to losing everything. To being used until I died, discarded the moment my usefulness expired. If I hadn't overheard that conversation, if I had been just a little more trusting, who knows how far they would have gone. That thought haunted me more than anything else. Not because I was afraid of death, but because I was afraid of dying with the wrong people at my side. People who smiled while checking the calendar, counting down the days until my last breath translated into their payday. That was the real betrayal. Not just what they said, but what it revealed about who they always were. It came nearly a year after I last saw them. The day I threw their bags onto the porch and told them they'd never be part of my life again. The day I locked the door and changed the locks not just on the house, but on my heart. I had moved on in the way most people never expect you to, quietly, thoroughly, without theatrics. I didn't look back. I had no reason to. But grief, as I've come to understand it, doesn't always come with death. Sometimes, it lingers in the absence of closure. And that's what made the letter that arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon all the more infuriating. Not because of what it said, but because of what it tried to take from me, the clean line I had drawn. I found it in my mailbox, no return address, just my full name written in a shaky hand I recognized instantly. Lorraine. I stood on my front porch holding that envelope like it was ticking. For a moment, I considered tossing it directly into the fireplace without reading a single word. But curiosity is a stubborn thing, especially when it collides with unfinished business. I opened it with a knife and sat down in the kitchen, where the late afternoon light slanted in through the blinds. The pages were damp from the weather, slightly smudged, but the words were clear. She began by saying she hoped I was well. Then she said she missed me. Not us, not our life. Just me. And that somehow made it feel more manipulative than any declaration of love could have. She wrote about how hard things had been, how she'd lost her job, how Kayla had distanced herself, how everything that once made her life comfortable had unraveled after we ended. She said she wasn't writing to ask for money. Only a moment of your time, if you can find it in your heart. That phrase made me grit my teeth. If you can find it in your heart, as if the burden of reconciliation now rested on me, as if the wound she'd left behind was somehow mine to mend. She said she wanted to explain. She wanted to meet for coffee. No expectations, she wrote. Just conversation. I didn't respond right away. I let the letter sit on the kitchen counter for 3 days, each morning reading it again, hoping the words would change. They didn't. The apology was still vague. The responsibility still minimal. But the weight of time had softened me, not into forgiveness, but into curiosity. Part of me needed to know, would she lie to my face the same way she lied behind my back? My cousin Daniel warned me not to go. Don't give her the stage again, he said bluntly. She'll turn the whole thing into a monologue about how hard her life is now that you stopped paying her bills. He wasn't wrong. But still, I agreed to meet. I picked a neutral location, quiet, public, emotionally antiseptic. A small cafe downtown where we wouldn't be interrupted and I wouldn't be tempted to stay longer than I had to. When I walked in, she was already there. She looked different. Not bad, not disheveled, but smaller somehow. Like life had finally closed the distance between how she saw herself and how the world treated her. Her hair was darker, pulled back in a simple ponytail. No designer bag, no jewelry, no lipstick. She looked like a version of herself I had never known, the one who had run out of masks. "Hi," she said softly, rising halfway before sitting back down. I gave a curt nod and sat across from her. For a full minute, neither of us spoke. Just the clinking of dishes and the low murmur of strangers filled the air. Then she exhaled, long and slow, and said, "I know I'm the last person you want to see." She wasn't wrong, but I said nothing. I wanted to hear her speak. I wanted to hear what kind of story she would build around her actions. She started with the usual, how things had gotten complicated, how she was going through a lot at the time, how Kayla was young and reckless. I listened, patiently, until she finally said, "I never should have let her talk about you like that." That was the first honest sentence she uttered, and it was also the first time I felt something stir, anger, not sadness. "Let her," I said, voice low. "You didn't just let her. You fed it. You promised her my properties. You planned a future without me in it." Her eyes welled up. "I didn't mean it like that." That's when I leaned forward. "Then tell me how you did mean it, Lorraine. Tell me what part of that conversation was just a misunderstanding. Because from where I stood, it sounded like you were waiting for me to die." The tears came then, fast and practiced. She looked down at her lap like a child caught in a lie. "I was angry," she whispered. "I felt like I was losing you already. You were so distant all the time. I made a stupid comment to make her feel better." That sentence said everything I needed to hear. It wasn't about remorse. It was about justification. It was about making her betrayal a symptom of my shortcomings. I sat back in my chair and nodded slowly. "I'm glad you told me," I said. She looked up, eyes hopeful. "So, can we talk again? Maybe not today, but sometime." I paused. The pause that changes everything. Then I said, "No?" She blinked. "No. No," I repeated. "This conversation is the last one we're ever going to have. You don't get to rewrite what happened. You don't get to reshape the truth because it's uncomfortable. I'm not angry anymore, Lorraine, but I am done." Her face crumbled. Not dramatically, no sobs or pleas, just a slow, bitter realization that I wasn't going to be reeled back in. She nodded, lips trembling, and said, "Okay." I stood up, dropped a $10 bill on the table, and walked out. I didn't look back. That night, I felt strange. Not triumphant, not relieved, just still, like something had finally settled in my chest. I had looked my betrayer in the eyes, listened to her justifications, and still chosen myself. It wasn't the closure she wanted, but it was the clarity I needed. And in a world full of people waiting for you to doubt yourself, clarity is the most priceless thing you can own. They thought I wouldn't make it without them. That was the part one kept turning over in my mind like a stone worn smooth by time. It wasn't just that they betrayed me. It was that they assumed I was weak, disposable, an old fool with a full wallet and an empty spine. That's the insult that lingered the longest. Not the betrayal itself, but their confidence in it. The belief that I was so desperate for love, I would overlook the poison they were slowly feeding me. But what they never understood is that people like me don't break. We harden. We learn. And when we finally draw the line, we never step back over it. It's been over a year since that day I stood in the hallway and heard my own death spoken of like a punchline. A year since I threw them out without apology, rewrote my will, and chose silence over explanation. The peace that followed wasn't cinematic. It wasn't filled with grand moments or poetic justice. It was slow, quiet, restorative. I found myself in the smallest acts, folding my own laundry without sighs in the background, drinking my morning coffee without being asked for something, walking through my home without stepping around resentment that had been festering for years. I thought healing would be dramatic, but it wasn't. It was ordinary. And maybe that's what made it real. I started gardening again, something I hadn't done since before Lorraine moved in. Back then, she said it made me look too old, like I was leaning into retirement instead of staying youthful. So I stopped. I let the backyard grow wild, let the flowers die in their beds. But now, I walked out every morning with shears in hand, trimming back the chaos, making order out of neglect. One day, I stood at the center of the garden and realized something. It had taken me less than a year to bring it back to life. Less than a year to take something overgrown and tangled and make it bloom again. And I thought, if that isn't a metaphor, I don't know what is. Every once in a while, someone from the past would try to reopen the door. A cousin who still talked to Lorraine called me recently and said, "She's been through a lot, you know." I let him talk. Let him list the hardships, the couch surfing, the jobs that never lasted, the daughter who stopped speaking to her after the arrest, and the failed court diversion program. Then I asked him one simple question. And what does any of that have to do with me? He didn't have an answer. Because deep down, even he knew, being mistreated doesn't entitle someone to a second chance. Especially not when they planned your exit like it was a business strategy. There's something powerful in standing your ground, in watching the storm pass while you stay rooted. I used to think forgiveness was the highest form of growth, but I've learned that sometimes the real growth is choosing not to reopen a door just because someone knocks with tears in their eyes. Especially when those tears come only after the money's gone. Especially when the love they offer is conditional, calculated. I forgave them in my own way, not by forgetting, but by refusing to let their actions define the rest of my life. That's what peace looks like. Not pretending it didn't happen, but refusing to live inside the wound. A few weeks ago, I got a message from Kayla. A DM on one of those platforms I rarely use, but still keep active for occasional updates from old colleagues and distant friends. It was short. Just one sentence. I didn't understand what you gave me until I lost it. I stared at it for a long time, not because it moved me, but because it confirmed what I had always known. She didn't love me. She loved the comfort I provided. And now that it was gone, she realized too late that unconditional support is a currency far more valuable than cash. I didn't reply, not out of spite, but because there was nothing left to say. Some stories don't need epilogues. Now, when people come to my home, they remark on how calm it feels, how quiet, how welcoming. They don't know the history. They don't know that this home was once a battlefield where smiles had daggers. But I do. And every inch of reclaimed space reminds me of what I endured and what I overcame. I look around and I see not just furniture or paint or light fixtures. I see decisions, boundaries, freedom. Every empty room is filled with the echo of a man who chose to live instead of merely survive. I'm not bitter. That surprises some people. They expect me to be jaded, guarded, cold. But I'm not. I'm clear. There's a difference. Bitterness is a prison. Clarity is a compass. I don't hate Lorraine or Kayla. I don't wish them harm. I simply wish them away. Away from my peace. Away from my future. Away from any version of me that still feels the need to prove I'm good enough to be loved. Because the truth is, I always was. I just gave that truth to the wrong people. They used to laugh behind my back and call me the joke of a man. But look who's still standing. Look who's thriving. They thought I wouldn't make it a year. And yet here I am, more alive than I've ever been. The joke, it turns out, was on them. Because they bet on my weakness, and they lost. And I reclaim my life. If you've ever been dismissed, betrayed, or underestimated by the very people you opened your heart to, know this. You don't have to explain your boundaries to those who broke them. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't anger, it's distance. If this story hit home, share your thoughts in the comments, like the video, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories about resilience, boundaries, and the strength it takes to walk away. See you soon in the next one.